15% of domestic property suddenly freed up from state or quasi-state ownership in the form of housing associations and council houses. So that would be an end to rent for 3 million households. I mean, this is always something that gets me about planners trying to plan for housing growth, because of course actually there are very few actually homeless people. It's the matching of available housing with people who need it, and part of the problem with that is the tax regime, in that it's it's expensive for it's still expensive for companies to operate, let's say, in Liverpool, because the taxes are on wages, not on land. If there was no tax at all, Liverpool would be a dirt cheap place to employ people and to start shifting the balance of economic power out to currently run-down areas, just the same way as land tax would achieve, perhaps quicker by forcing them. So I don't think, that you would have much more of a match fairly quickly between where the economic activity was, to which people would have to go because there was no welfare, and available land.
Just as a right libertarian, what I would conceive being as the objectives in terms of land ownership in, say, this country, are the abolition of planning controls, the replacement with a law of nuisance that can deal with problems where people are doing activities that damage you, things like that. You've got state-owned land, which has to be put to market in some shape or form, and there are various ways of doing that. Those are the things that I would see as needing to be done. Is there anything which the left libertarians would conceive of in terms of land law, others, land reform that's any different from that? Are we in fact thinking the same thing?
I think essentially. I mean, it's taken me. I mean, I suppose when I talked about being convinced by Hopper, that probably wasn't quite true, because I still had this feeling that rent was somehow something that should be equally distributed in some shape or form. And now I don't think, I mean, those basic improvements of planning, and as I say, less of a requirement to all cluster around the same centre of power or the same.
You would be happy as a left libertarian with a free market in land title?
Yeah. In fact, I think the free market in land title would roughly replicate, but it may be for profit rather than for distribution, a sort of George's tax.
That is the best way of distribution, I think.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to give a comment on what might happen with the land ownership. I'm quite critical of land ownership myself, and I don't think you would lose your home or something, but I can imagine that, like, big land ownership, like huge farms or whatever, like in Australia, for example, I think the biggest farm is as big as Switzerland or something. I don't see how you can enforce this huge amount of land ownership without a state, because you would almost need an army. Especially when you think of right libertarians, whatever that may be, like Hopper, for example. They even think like of a very radical concept of ownership. Like when you own land, you can decide everything that is done with this land. And you can even, for example, prevent people from trespassing this land. And I don't see how a farmer will, that has a farm of that size, would ever enforce that people are not even walking over it. And I don't see this historically, actually, that this has ever happened. I mean, I grew up in a very countryside area, and no farmer ever ask for permission when we were just trespassing the land. That's not what it is for. So I think we would see different forms of property, not in the very radical sense of how libertarian use the words, that a property owner can do everything with its property and can decide everything what is done with its property. But maybe we would see like partial property, like only one person has the right to feed their cows on this land, but that doesn't mean he can prohibit other people from trespassing. But in generally, I think it's not that useful to really discuss what would be the ideal world, but just to get rid of the state and then see what happens. So that's the main.
I mean, I would expect, I would hope that some people would, leaseholders, for example, would challenge perhaps the right of their feudal lord still to exact tribute from them in court. I mean, because I imagine that most of the sort of, the 600 acres that the Fat Hunter acquired through his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's wife in Belgravia or whatever, that has been state privileged for all those years. And I think in Rothbard's terms, whilst you can't, whilst you might not be able to prove that you're the original occupier from whom it was taken by grant of the crown or whatever, all that you need to do is prove that it was unjustly acquired in the first place for it to still be an injustice. So I mean, I'd like to see some people challenge that, and therefore more people end up with owning outright where they live. But I think ultimately the costs of holding something which a lot of people somehow need access to, whether it's a precious piece of land in an area of some kind of special shortage, the cost of holding that out of use, I think would be high enough to effectively end up mimicking usufruct sort of ownership structure anyway.
This whole